Have you ever felt as if there were several different versions of you inside, each pulling you in a different direction? One part of you wants to be loved, while another wants to win. One part wants to get closer, while another wants to run away. One part says, I want to be true to myself, and another immediately warns, don't be so selfish. If you often find yourself caught in this kind of inner tug of war, then this episode is for you. Hello everyone, I'm Manya. Today we're going to talk about Karen Horney's classic work, Our Inner Conflicts. Karen Horney was one of the most influential psychoanalysts of the 20th century and a leading figure in the neo-Freudian tradition. Unlike Freud, who placed greater emphasis on instinctual drives and conflicts, Horney focused on the ways society, culture, relationships, and personal development shape the human psyche. She didn't see us simply as beings driven by instinct. Instead, she believed that throughout our lives, we retain the capacity to change, even in fundamental ways. So today, through the lens of our inner conflicts, we're going to explore why we so often feel pulled in different directions. This book can help us recognize our habitual patterns in relationships, identify our false self-images, and gradually move toward a more authentic and integrated version of ourselves. At the very beginning of the book, Horney reminds us that inner conflict isn't something experienced only by a small group of troubled people. As long as we're alive and have choices to make, conflict is part of life. We can feel torn in all kinds of ways. We want to be alone, yet we're afraid of loneliness. We want to be understood, yet we don't want to appear vulnerable. We want to succeed, yet we're tired of competing. We want to be kind, yet we still experience jealousy, anger, and resentment. This isn't being dramatic. It's simply part of the complexity of being human. Animals rely more heavily on instinct, while human beings must face choices. Choice is a form of freedom, but is also a burden. This is especially true in the modern world. We live among competing values and countless possibilities, but the more choices we have, the more inner conflict we may experience. Honey tells us that consciously confronting our conflicts may be painful, but it can also be an invaluable asset. Only when we see our conflicts clearly do we have the possibility of no longer being controlled by them unconsciously. Often, our pain doesn't come from any one choice. It comes from our unwillingness to admit that we can't have everything. We want freedom, but we also want security. We want deep intimacy, but we don't want to be affected by anyone. We want success, but we don't want to endure the pressure that comes with it. Maturity means knowing what we want and also knowing what we're willing to give up. So, where do these inner conflicts appear most often? Horney believed that they most commonly arise in our relationships with other people. When someone feels unsafe, they will often develop three basic ways of coping: moving toward people, moving against people, and moving away from people. A psychologically healthy person has access to all three. We can move closer to others, and we can protect ourselves. We can cooperate, and we can compete. We can enter into relationships, and we can also spend time alone. But when someone lacks a sense of inner security, These three ways of relating may become rigid and compulsive. They may even begin to conflict with one another. Let's start with the first coping strategy, moving toward people. The deepest longing of people who rely on this strategy is to be loved, accepted, recognized, and cared for. They are often considerate, sensitive, and highly attuned to other people's emotions. They are also deeply afraid of conflict. This pattern might show up in everyday life in many ways. They may find it difficult to say no because they're afraid of disappointing others. They may always take care of other people's feelings first and leave their own needs until last. Even when they feel hurt or mistreated, they say, "It's fine." They apologize out of habit, even when they've done nothing wrong. They may become anxious when someone seems distant, leaves a message unread, or suddenly changes their tone. In relationships, they may give too much while secretly hoping the other person will notice their needs without being asked. They may appear extremely kind, but mixed into that kindness is often a deep fear. If I'm not good enough, considerate enough, or useful enough, will I be abandoned? Horney points out that for people caught in this pattern, love is often given far too much power. Love becomes a kind of cure. If someone truly loves me, I'll finally feel safe. If someone chooses me completely, my life will finally be whole. But no relationship can carry the burden of rescuing someone's entire life. Healthy closeness isn't the same as people pleasing. It doesn't mean sacrificing yourself just to keep a relationship intact. It means being able to express your needs honestly while also allowing yourself to receive love and care from others. If you recognize yourself in this pattern, you can begin with something very small. When you want care or attention, instead of hinting at it, try saying directly, "I need some company today." Or allow yourself to accept a small act of help from someone without feeling that you must repay them immediately. Healthy closeness means I'm allowed to need you, but I won't place the weight of my entire life on your shoulders. The second coping strategy is moving against people. People who rely on this strategy tend to hold a basic belief that the world is a battlefield and that relationships are fundamentally competitive. If you aren't strong, you'll be bullied. If you don't win, you'll be left behind. They value strength, efficiency, success, control, and status. They dislike weakness and don't allow themselves to be vulnerable. This pattern can show up in many ways. They feel they must never lose, fall behind, or appear useless. They refuse to ask for help because asking for help feels like admitting weakness. They prefer to control the situation and dislike being influenced by others. They're demanding of other people and even more demanding of themselves. They may also turn relationships into power struggles, believing that whoever reaches out first, apologizes first, or shows affection first has lost. They may appear strong or even charismatic, but deep down they're rarely at ease. Moving against people has a healthy form too. It isn't about defeating or dominating others. It's about having the strength and boundaries to protect yourself. I know where my boundaries are, and I can speak up when they're crossed. I can disagree with someone without humiliating them. I can admit that I need help without seeing it as a sign of weakness. True strength isn't the ability to make everyone obey you. It's the ability to stand firmly on your own side while still retaining the capacity to understand others. It isn't about always winning. It's about knowing that even when you don't win, you still have value. The third coping strategy is moving away from people. People who rely on this strategy don't want to depend on others, but they don't want to fight with them either. They simply want to retreat into their own world, where they can be free from demands, expectations, and emotional entanglements. They value independence, privacy, and freedom. They're afraid of being controlled, tied down, or drawn too deeply into relationships. This can show up in everyday life in several ways. As soon as a relationship begins to deepen, they want to escape. They dislike commitment and fear being tied to someone over the long term. When another person gets even slightly closer, they may feel as if their boundaries are being invaded. They may appear calm on the surface, but deep down, they're afraid of losing control. They often use being busy, tired, or in need of space as a way to avoid relationships. Of course, there's nothing wrong with being alone. Healthy solitude can be deeply constructive. It allows us to reconnect with ourselves, restore our energy, and develop our creativity. But Horney says that neurotic withdrawal isn't a free choice, it's a defense. It isn't I enjoy being alone, it's I can only be alone. It's as if the person has drawn a magic circle around themselves, and anyone who comes too close triggers anxiety. Healthy withdrawal means I can step back and return to myself when I need to, but I won't use silence or disappearance to punish others, and I won't trap myself in isolation. A healthy balance among moving toward, moving against, and moving away from people looks like this. When a relationship is worth approaching, I can allow myself to get close. When my boundaries are crossed, I can say no. When I need to recharge, I can spend time alone. And when the situation changes, I can shift flexibly from one response to another. If we relied on only one of these strategies, moving toward, moving against, or moving away from people, the problem might not seem so complicated. The real difficulty is that all three forces are often pulling at us at the same time. We may want to be loved while also looking down on ourselves for needing love so much. We may say, I don't need anyone, while lying awake at night wishing someone could truly understand us. And so we begin to feel divided inside. But human beings are deeply uncomfortable with this sense of inner division. To convince ourselves that we're consistent, reasonable, and completely fine, we try to create an artificial sense of harmony, even when we're anything but fine. Horney discusses several important defense mechanisms that people use to cope with inner conflict and the feeling of being divided. Today, we're going to focus on three of them. The first defense mechanism is the idealized self image. We create an ideal version of ourselves in our minds, someone who is always productive, always emotionally stable, always kind and respectable, or always calm, effortless, and sophisticated. An idealized self image forces us to perform. It can make us feel grandiose when we seem to live up to it and deeply inadequate when we don't. The moment we fail to match that perfect image, we begin attacking ourselves. Why am I so inadequate? Why do I still feel jealous? Why do I still need other people? Why haven't I succeeded yet? Why did I lose control of my emotions again? As a result, many of us aren't actually becoming who we are. We're simply trying to maintain an image that resembles us on the surface but doesn't reflect who we truly are. If you recognize yourself in this defense mechanism, the next time you tell yourself, I should, pause and ask, does this expectation come from my values or from my fear? Does it help me become more authentic? Or does it simply make me more tense? Real growth doesn't require you to become a god. It only asks you to become more and more real. The second common defense mechanism is externalization. This means experiencing an inner conflict as if it were entirely an external problem. Horney reminds us that when we attribute all our pain to external causes, we lose the power to change. For example, I'm unhappy because my partner doesn't understand me. I have no motivation because my parents constantly criticized and discouraged me when I was growing up. I'm angry because everyone around me is stupid. These statements may contain some truth, but if we stop there, we overlook our own power. A mature person asks, what can I do now to change the situation? Taking responsibility doesn't mean blaming yourself for everything. It means recognizing that you still have agency, choices, and the power to shape your own life. The third defense mechanism is rationalization. This means giving our pain a reasonable or respectable sounding explanation so that we don't have to face what we truly feel. We want to be loved, but tell ourselves relationships are pointless. We're afraid of failure, but say, I'm simply above all this competition. We've been hurt, but act as if we couldn't care less. Honey points out that one lie often requires another lie to sustain it. Over time, we become trapped in a web of our own making. So, the first step toward growth is becoming more honest with ourselves. If you've already recognized parts of yourself in these patterns, moving toward, moving against, or moving away from people, welcome to subscribe to this channel. Every week, we explore classic ideas from psychology and philosophy and talk about relationships, anxiety, and personal growth in the modern world. Your likes and subscriptions also help this channel reach more people who may need these conversations. Thank you for your support. Now, let's continue. So far, we've talked about how people defend themselves against inner conflict. Next, Honey explains that when these conflicts remain unseen and unresolved for a long time, they can harm us in four major ways. The first harm is that unresolved conflict creates fear. We may be afraid that other people will see through us and discover that we aren't actually as good as we pretend to be. We may fear that failure proves we have no value. We may also fear change because, although our old patterns are painful, they're at least familiar. Horney argues that to develop a more integrated personality, we must be willing to face our fears directly. Fear is like a kind of purgatory. We have to move through it before we can experience genuine freedom. The second harm is that unresolved conflict can leave us completely exhausted. Someone may appear to be procrastinating or unproductive, but that doesn't necessarily mean they lack ability. Their inner forces may simply be working against one another. They want to write, but they're afraid they won't write well. They want to pursue an opportunity, but they fear rejection. They want to express themselves, but they worry that other people won't like them. It's like driving a car while pressing the accelerator and the brake at the same time. The engine roars, but the car doesn't move forward. Procrastination isn't always just a time management problem. It can also be a sign of unresolved inner conflict. The third harm is that unresolved conflict undermines our authenticity. To live authentically means trying not to betray our genuine feelings and values. But when we become too invested in maintaining a certain image, we begin to pretend. We pretend to love. We pretend not to care. We pretend to be strong. Over time, we may become so disconnected from ourselves that we start believing our own performance. The fourth harm is that unresolved conflict can lead to despair. Here, despair means losing hope in our ability to become who we truly are. Some people appear to function perfectly well on the surface. They go to work, socialize, get married, make money, and post on social media as if everything were normal. But deep inside, unresolved conflict slowly drains their vitality. They may become emotionally detached or controlling. They may even try to ease their own pain by belittling others. Horney described an extreme form of this pattern as a sadistic tendency. When someone has lost hope in themselves, they may try to gain a compensatory sense of power by controlling, humiliating, or hurting others. So, how can we begin to understand and integrate our inner conflicts? Here's an exercise you can try. Write down one situation that has been causing you the most inner conflict lately. Then ask yourself three questions. 1. What do I want to move toward? 2. What do I need to stand up against? 3. What am I trying to get away from? For example, perhaps the situation causing you the most emotional strain is a romantic relationship. What you want to move toward might be love and respect. What you need to stand up against might be being ignored or belittled. And what you want to get away from might be conflict, arguments, or yet another dishonest explanation. When you can see all three forces at work at the same time, you begin to recognize that different parts of you are trying to meet different needs. You don't have to let these forces keep pulling you apart or draining your energy. You can pause, acknowledge them, understand them, take ownership of them, and then make the choice that feels most honest and authentic to you. Thank you for listening. If you found this episode helpful, please like, subscribe, and share it with a friend who may be feeling torn in a relationship. Whenever you feel torn inside, may you learn to step out of the cycle of inner struggle a little sooner. Meet your own needs with greater compassion and choose your path with clarity and courage. I'm Manya. See you next time.